Welcome back. In this video, I wanted to go over S3 versioning, replication, and touch on lifecycle policies. Now, what is S3 versioning? Well, it simply means you can keep multiple copies of an object in the same bucket. So let's say we have a Word document and this document gets updated with new information. We add a couple of paragraphs here and there and it changes the story. So we upload it to our S3 bucket and the file gets updated. With versioning, if we ever decide we want to go back and see what changed, we can simply download an older version of this document to see what changed with each iteration. Each version gets a version ID, and this helps because versioning can retrieve and restore every version of any object we store in our S3 bucket, in the case any file gets overwritten or deleted. But for versioning to work, we must have it enabled at the bucket level. Now, to help us protect our data, we also have cross-region replication and same-region replication. Before we attempt to use either one of these replication features, we need to have versioning enabled on both the source bucket and destination bucket. So for both of these features, the data gets replicated from one bucket to the other. For cross-region replication, our data gets replicated from one region, in this case North Virginia, to the destination bucket, in this case the Ohio region. For same region replication, both of the buckets are in the same region, in this case just the North Virginia region. Now, the buckets can belong to two different AWS accounts. For example, you can have your data in a development account, and once it's ready, it can get replicated to your production account. Now, to help automate some of the replication, we can use replication rules so that the objects get automatically replicated to the destination bucket. In our S3 console, remember we had two S3 buckets. The ZTM-lab bucket located in North Virginia and the ZTM-lab-2 bucket located in North California. And for you guys that are not familiar with the US, that is across the country. So let's say we want to replicate the data from the ZTM-lab bucket to the ZTM-lab-2 bucket. What is the first thing we would need to do? That's right, we need to make sure we have versioning enabled in both buckets before trying to replicate the data. So I will first click on my ZTM-lab bucket. We will then go to the Properties tab, scroll down a bit till we see the bucket versioning, and as you can see, it is currently disabled. Let's click on the Edit button. We will then click on the Enable option. This will enable versioning for the ZTM-lab bucket. We will then click on Save Changes. Now, every time we upload an object to our S3 bucket, it will version our objects. For example, let's upload our mahjongvegeta.png file. As you can see, this version will have a mustache, and the file size is a bit bigger. So, like previously, I will drop in our file into the S3 bucket and upload it. Once it's done uploading, I will click on my file, go to the Versions tab, and here we can see two versions. The original version I uploaded and this current version here. As you can see, this version doesn't have a mustache. Now, let's close this window and select our current version and click on Open. As you can see, this current version has a mustache. Now that I showed you how versioning looks like, let's go back to our S3 console and enable versioning on our destination bucket. We will select the ZTM-lab-2 bucket, which will be our destination bucket. We will click on the Properties tab and let's click on the Edit button. We will then click on the Enable option. We will then click on Save Changes. We now have versioning enabled on both of our buckets. Let's go back to our source bucket, the ZTM-lab bucket in the North Virginia region. Let's click on the Management tab. Let's scroll down a little bit till we see the Replication Rules. As of right now, we don't have any replication rules created. Let's click on the Create Replication Rule. I'll name my rule Replicate to ZTM Lab 2. We can leave the status as enabled so that it is enabled once we get done creating our replication rule. If we scroll down a bit, we can choose our scope to apply to all the objects in the source bucket. We have the option to add tags to limit the scope of the replication, but we won't add any in this lab. We will choose our destination as the ZTM-lab-2 bucket. So let's click on the Browse S3 button. And here we can see our buckets listed, but I will go ahead and choose the ZTM-lab-2 bucket as our destination and click on Choose Path. Now, we do have to specify an IAM role, but we can have AWS create an IAM role for us. So we will choose Create New Role from the dropdown. And since we won't be changing anything else, we can go ahead and click on Save Changes. One thing I want to mention before we continue is that all the existing files will not be replicated to the destination bucket. Only the new files after the replication rule has been created will be copied over to the destination bucket. We will go back to our ZTM-lab bucket and upload a file. I will drop in my file and then click on Upload. After it is done uploading, we can go to our destination bucket, the ZTM-lab-2 bucket. Now, if you don't see the file appear right away, just give it a second and then click on the refresh button. It should appear almost right away depending on how large the file you uploaded is. As you can see, it is now in our destination bucket. Now let's quickly look at Lifecycle Rules. Let's go into our ZTM-lab bucket and let's click on the Management tab. Currently, we do not have any Lifecycle Rules configured. We can add one by clicking on the Create Lifecycle Rule button. We can give our lifecycle rule a name. I'll just call my lifecycle rule S3 to S3IA, and I will choose my rule scope to all the objects in our ZTM-lab bucket. It will ask us to acknowledge that it will apply to all the objects in the bucket. If we scroll down, we can select the action for our lifecycle rule. We can choose from this list, and as we select from the list, more boxes appear below so that we can properly configure the lifecycle rule. I will simply choose to move my current and non-current object versions between storage classes. If we scroll down a bit, we can configure our lifecycle rule to transition our objects to any of the other S3 storage classes, but for this lab, I will just choose the S3 standard IA storage class. We also must input a number for the number of days after the object has been created to transition the objects to the S3IA storage class. I will input 60 days for the current values, and I will input 30 days for non-current objects. If we scroll down a bit, we can see a summary of our configuration. We configured current object versions to be moved to standard IA after 60 days, and then we can configure non-current versions to be transitioned after 30 days. So now S3 will automatically move current and non-current objects to the S3 IA storage class. I will go ahead and click on Create Rule. As you can see, Our lifecycle rule is now created. Pretty simple, right? I hope in this video you learned a little more about S3 versioning, replication, and lifecycle policies. I'll see you in the next video.